7 Miles to Freedom, the Robert Smalls story. Robert Smalls' dreams of freedom began in his hometown of Beaufort, South Carolina, the largest town on a cluster of plantation islands down the coast from Charleston. He was born there in 1839 in the slave quarters on the McKee family's property. Robert's mother was a house servant, and when he was about 6 years old, Robert also began working in the McKee household. He brushed Master McKee's horse, carried his hunting bow, and baited his fishing hook. Good-spirited and talkative, Robert was the master's favorite. As a favored house servant, Robert had an easier life than most slaves. Even so, from the time he was a young boy, he witnessed the evils of slavery. At neighboring plantations, he saw slaves whipped until they were bloody, punished for the simplest things: getting to the field a few moments late, missing a patch of weeds, not working fast enough. In town, Robert watched boys and girls his own age sold like animals on the auction block. Although the McKees were kind to him, Robert grew to hate slavery. More and more, he wished to be free. In 1851, when Robert was 12, the McKees sent him to live and work in Charleston. All day and into the night he waited tables and made deliveries to rooms at the elegant Planters Hotel. Robert earned $5 a month, but had to give the money to his master. Anytime Robert wasn't working, he headed to the waterfront. He watched the boats of all shapes and sizes, fascinated by how they could sail anywhere in the world. Robert liked talking to the workers on the ships. In hushed voices, they told him stories about up north, where all colored people were free to learn to read and write, free to keep the money they earned, free to make their own decisions. Robert's eyes lit up with hope. Someday he would have those freedoms too. Eager to spend more time at the waterfront, Robert got permission from Master McKee to work at the docks, loading and unloading cargo from ships. Robert worked hard. He was smart and dependable, and by age 15 he was foreman of a crew, directing men twice his age. Eventually, Robert grew to dislike the routine of the job, so he began working in the shipyard, making and rigging sails. Robert enjoyed testing the sails on boats in the water, and he learned to navigate narrow channels, gliding carefully past hidden rocks. His boss boasted that Robert had the makings of a wheelman, a title given to colored boat pilots in the South. When Robert was 17, he met Hannah Jones, a Charleston hotel maid who was the slave of Samuel Kingman. Robert loved Hannah's sparkling eyes and sharp intelligence and wanted to spend his life with her. In order to marry and live together, the couple worked out agreements with their masters. Robert and Hannah would find their own jobs. Every month, Robert would give McKee $15, and Hannah would give Kingman $7. Any other money the couple earned would be their own. Robert and Hannah married on December 24th, 1856, and in February 1858, their first child, Elizabeth, was born. As Robert held the tiny bundle, he was saddened by the realization that Elizabeth did not belong to them. She was the property of Hannah's master. So Robert made a deal to buy his wife's and daughter's freedom for $800. Although Robert was still enslaved, the arrangement would allow Hannah and Elizabeth to go wherever he went. Robert and Hannah didn't know how they would save that much money, but they were going to try. In the evenings, by candlelight, Hannah sewed garments for the wealthy women of Charleston, while Robert studied charts and maps of the harbor, rivers, creeks, and channels. He noted the location of every reef, sandbar, and current. Soon, Robert was expertly navigating the waterways, delivering boats to plantations all along the coast. During summers, he worked as a sailor on a coastal schooner. His dedication and skill earned him a reputation as one of the best boat handlers in Charleston. After 3 years, Robert and Hannah had saved $700. The couple were close to their goal, but a storm was brewing in the nation. By the spring of 1861, Charleston was at the eye of the storm. For a long time, northern and southern states had been arguing about slavery. As the country expanded west, Southerners wanted slavery allowed in the new territories. Northerners did not. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln, who opposed the spread of slavery, was elected president. South Carolina responded by breaking away from the United States. Several other southern states followed. Together, they formed the Confederate States of America. The northern states remained the United States of America, or the Union. The Confederacy quickly took charge of many military forts in the South, but the Union kept control of Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor. On April 12, 1861, a battle for Fort Sumter ended in the fort's surrender to the Confederacy. A civil war between the North and South had begun. For slaves such as Robert and Hannah, war brought uncertainty, but also hope. If the North won, slavery would end. Commercial boat traffic in and out of Charleston Harbor slowed to a trickle. Soon there was no work for Robert in the shipyard. In July, he took a job as a deckhand on the Planter, a 147-foot wood-burning steamer. The boat once hauled cotton, but had been converted into an armed Confederate ship for carrying soldiers, equipment, and supplies. All that summer, on the Planter, Robert helped build up Confederate defenses in the harbor and along the coast. He laid mines, destroyed a lighthouse, and built new forts. But in his heart, Robert wanted the Union to win the war. Robert's navigational skills and knowledge of the waterways impressed the Planter's officers. He was promoted to wheelman, a position of trust and honor. Now responsible for steering the boat, Robert learned the secret steam whistle signals for passing the harbor's many forts. In late 1861, freedom suddenly grew closer for Robert and Hannah. The Union Navy captured Port Royal, just down the coast from Charleston. A Union fleet set up a blockade at the entrance to Charleston Harbor. Looking through the captain's field glasses, Robert could see the northern ships. The Union lines and freedom were within reach, only 7 miles away. This gave Robert renewed hope and determination, as did the birth of his son, Robert Jr. Now more than ever, Robert knew he had to find a way to freedom for himself and his growing family. When the opportunity finally came, it started with a joke. One evening, the boat's white officers went ashore to spend the night, even though this was against military rules. Jokingly, one of the crew plopped the captain's straw hat on Robert's head. Robert crossed his arms and strutted about, just like the short, strongly built captain. Everyone laughed. Given Robert's similar build, the resemblance was amazing. Suddenly, Robert became serious and told the men to keep the joke to themselves. He had an idea. Robert shared his plan with Hannah. On a night when the officers were ashore, he and the crew would steal the Planter. Their families would hide at a nearby wharf and be picked up on the way. Wearing the captain's hat and responding with the secret steam whistle signals, Robert would trick the fort guards into letting the ship pass. He would sail the Planter out to the Union fleet and to freedom. Hannah asked him what would happen if they were caught. Robert told her they would probably be shot. Hannah was quiet for a moment and then agreed to go along. She too was willing to risk her life and the lives of their children for a chance at freedom. Robert explained the plan to his crewmates and made them promise to keep it secret. He also told them that if something went wrong, they would sink the ship rather than allow themselves to be captured. If it didn't go down fast enough, they would all clasp hands and jump overboard. The men agreed. They trusted Robert, and they too yearned for freedom. The timing was left to Robert. He had to choose the right moment. Day after day, Robert watched and listened. In the spring of 1862, an opportunity arose. The Planter's crew was to move 4 cannons guarding a river southwest of Charleston to a fort being built in the harbor. The captain wanted the move completed by dark on Monday, May 12th. The officers planned to go ashore that night and stay until morning. Robert realized this was the chance he had been waiting for. On May 12th, the Planter traveled to the river to transfer the cannons. Robert and his crewmates knew how valuable these weapons would be to the Union. They planned to delay the delivery of the cannons and escape with them. The men purposefully worked slowly. They fumbled knots and dropped lines. By the time all 4 cannons were on board, it was late afternoon. Robert's plan was working. Delivery to the fort would have to wait until morning. Robert's mind raced as he guided the Planter back to its dock in the harbor. The time for the escape was nearing. Throbbing with anticipation, he was careful not to let his excitement show. Finally, the officers went ashore, trusting Robert to have the boat ready for an early start in the morning. Robert immediately gathered the crew and went over the plan once more. Then the men sprang into action, loading stacks of firewood on deck to power the steam boilers and double-checking every instrument. Robert put on a white ruffled shirt, a dress jacket, and the captain's wide-brimmed straw hat. It was 3 o'clock in the morning by the time a full head of steam hissed in the boilers. The Confederate and South Carolina flags were raised to the top of the mast. In the pilot house, Robert gripped the wheel as he backed the Planter away from its deck. The ship coasted upstream a short way and stopped. A rowboat stole from the Planter to fetch the families of the crew from a boat they had hidden in since nightfall. Robert peered uneasily at the dark water, waiting for the rowboat to return with its precious load. After a few long minutes, it appeared. In pin-drop quiet, the families boarded and were led below deck. With everyone safely aboard, Robert started down the harbor. He blew the whistle to leave the dockside, and it was answered. Fighting a strong urge to rush, Robert eased the ship cautiously into the open water. He had to stay calm. His family and the others on board were all counting on him. Robert's patience paid off. The shore guard saw the Planter leave, but did not stop it. The Planter's paddle wheels cut through the dark water with a steady churn. Castle Pinckney and Fort Ripley were passed easily. Fort Johnson loomed ahead, its walls bristling with cannons. His palms sweaty, Robert reached for the cord of the steam whistle. He blew the secret signal and prayed. The lookout signaled back. All right. Robert breathed a sigh of relief. As the ship neared the massive walls of Fort Sumter, Robert saw that dawn was breaking. The Planter had lost time bucking the incoming tide. In the early morning light, the lookout might be able to tell that Robert was not the captain. An anxious crewmate told Robert to make a dash for freedom. But Robert knew that if the Planter sped by the fort, cannons would be fired on them, smashing the ship to pieces. He continued at the slow, even speed the guards expected. Robert asked a crewmate to take the wheel. He pulled down the captain's straw hat to shadow his face and stood at the window of the pilot house. Under his dress jacket, Robert's heart thumped loudly. Mimicking the captain, he folded his arms across his chest. Then, slowly, Robert sounded the signal. Woo, woo, woo. From the pilot house to the engine room to the hold, bodies tensed. The response was taking too long. Finally, the Planter received the signal to pass. Robert mopped sweat from his brow. There were only a few more miles to go and one more fort to pass. Fort Moultrie came up quickly, and the planter passed without trouble. Robert kept the same deliberate pace until the ship was out of range of the last Confederate gun. Then he ordered, "Full steam ahead." Clouds of black smoke belched from the smokestack. The boat surged forward, its paddle wheels whisking the water white. A Confederate lookout saw the burst of speed through his field glasses. When the ship headed out to sea, he knew something was wrong. Frantically, the lookout signaled an alert. Lights flashed and flickered, but it was too late. No Confederate guns could reach the planter now. The Union ships and Freedom waited just ahead, but the planter still was not safe. From the beginning, Robert had worried most about these final moments. Union soldiers would be prepared to fire on any boat coming from Charleston. Robert had to convince them not to shoot. Ordering the flags lowered and Hannah's best white sheet raised as a sign of surrender, Robert sailed toward the Onward, the nearest ship of the Union fleet. In the early morning fog, the Union lookout couldn't see the white sheet. He only saw a big boat speeding through the haze and mist. He thought it was a Confederate ship coming to ram them. The lookout shouted an alarm. The Onward turned, pointing a row of guns at the planter. Leaning hard on the wheel, Robert swung the boat around. With the turn, the white sheet caught the wind and flapped open on the ocean breeze. Suddenly, a Union sailor cried out that he saw a white flag. The Onward's captain ordered the gunners to hold their fire and instructed the planter to come alongside. Men, women, and children ran out onto the deck of the planter. Robert, standing straight and proud, stepped forward and raised the captain's hat high in the air. He shouted that he had brought the Union a load of Confederate cannons. When the Onward's surprised captain climbed aboard, Robert told him he thought the planter might be of some service to Uncle Abe Lincoln. Then Robert turned the Confederate ship and its cannons over to the Union Navy. The white sheet was lowered. As the planter's crew and their families gazed up, the Union flag rose skyward. Robert and Hannah held their children close, their hearts full of hope. On this morning of a new day, they were on their way to freedom. And there's an afterword. I'm not going to read that whole thing to you, but it tells about how Robert Smalls was praised as a national hero and about another adventure he had on the ship. It's just some interesting stuff. He did some amazing things during his life. This is a great biography of an awesome man. So I hope you pause that and read this part also if you're interested. And that was 7 Miles to Freedom, the Robert Smalls story. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you subscribe and come back often.